Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity to chat. My name is Chris Lowney. I grew up in Queens, New York, went to a Jesuit high school, joined the Jesuits, and was a seminarian for a few years, including teaching in a Jesuit high school, Fordham Prep, before I ended up leaving the Jesuits. So I know, at least remotely and 30 years ago, what life was like for the folks who are going to be attending the seminar.
A number of years ago, Chris Lowney wrote a book entitled Heroic Leadership. And that book identifies practices within the Society of Jesus that are applicable and informative to organizational leadership across all sectors, both religious and secular. The book has stood the test of time in part because it insightfully connects contemporary challenges with long-standing Jesuit ways of proceeding, which themselves have stood the test of time.
So I went to a Jesuit high school, and then I entered the Jesuits right after high school. I stayed for a few years. I wasn't a priest. I never went to theology. But when I decided my path in life was not as a Jesuit, I ended up with J.P. Morgan. And, I think in a way I probably appreciated the value of Jesuit spirituality, if you want to use that word, much more in my time at Morgan than I had when I was a Jesuit myself. Mostly because when I was very young at that time, and I was mostly in a seminary setting, and then I was in the real world, and I really felt like I saw the human applicability and relevance of a lot of these ideas. And so when I left Morgan, I just thought it might be fun and kind of interesting to write something that tried to take principles, ideas, themes that for Jesuits would have very deep religious roots, of course, and express them in a way that people of any other religious background, of no religious background, might find accessible, and also that people who are not necessarily in a Jesuit ministry, but even in a secular workplace like an investment bank, could find relevant. So that was the project I had in mind.
The concepts here can be illuminative to us because we've reached a point in the seminars in Ignatian leadership at which we're coming to understand Cura Apostolica. Specifically, we're exploring how we can continue to move the entire organization of Jesuit education forward. So we asked Chris to share insights from the very first and very final moments of the spiritual exercises that illuminate a way of proceeding and identifying leadership traits that can move Jesuit education forward innovatively.
Remember, part of where I was coming from when I wrote the book, and when I think about it, is principles that seem to me to be very durable and relevant and important no matter what anybody is doing. And one of the things I take, at least out of the first principle, is, first things first. You have to kind of understand very clearly this is what we're about here. In the spiritual exercise, of course, it talks about this is why I'm here on earth. This is the purpose of being a human being. But I think the point is just as relevant for an organization, in this case for Jesuit education more broadly. This idea of always being anchored in this is what we're about. I mean, if we do not have a clear idea of why we're here, why we're doing this, and we don't keep reminding ourselves of that, we're going to get into trouble. And I don't mean memorizing the mission statement, because often, frankly, in my experience, the mission statement is kind of gobbledygook. I mean, I know it's important, but it doesn't sound, it sounds artificial, but in some deep in the gut sense of, look, this is why we're here. And we all know it, and this is why we're showing up every day. So to me, I know you want to talk about indifference, but to me, the companion idea and really prior idea is, I know what I'm about. And then indifference becomes relevant as a value. Yeah, so I think indifference is in many ways the trickiest idea that at least I talk about to get a hold of, but also I think it's in many ways the most powerful idea, or a very powerful idea in the whole spirituality. And the first thing is the word indifference is a big problem, because in colloquial English, to be indifferent to something means kind of you don't like it. And then if people get past that, the next thing where people fall down a little bit is it sometimes means, well, I don't care, kind of a Buddhist sense of I'm not passionate about anything, I'm indifferent, which I think is also a wrong idea. And when I wrote my own first book, I used the idea of ingenuity, in part because I felt indifference was going to be too difficult a word to get around. And by no means are the two similar, but to me at least, indifference is really the great value added that the Jesuit spirituality has to how we become creative people, imaginative people, people who are able to do what's best for the mission. And let me explain it a little bit this way. So, if the first things first, here's our mission, here's our sense of purpose, here's what we're about, then to me the companion idea is, okay, am I able to make the decisions that are going to best serve the mission? Or am I so hung up by my own baggage, crap, issues, prejudices, you name it, that it ends up always interfering with my ability to make the choices that need to be made? And sometimes I see a lot of people who write Jesuit spirituality talk about it as an idea of inner freedom, and that I think is a helpful word, but to me it has to be freedom for something. So it's kind of, I'm free from my inner crap in order to be free for what we're all here to accomplish. To use the Jesuit word in indifference, this kind of freedom from our baggage and issues and attachments and hang-ups is really an essential ingredient for people to be able to be creative enough to make the best choices, the most interesting choices, the most imaginative choices to serve the mission that we're here for. Yeah, so the contemplation to attain love, which is a funny kind of a name, others can speak about that better than I can, is the last exercise in these spiritual exercises, and I'm not going to try to paraphrase it, but to me what I take away from it is it really is a kind of a worldview, and I think that's the first important takeaway I take from it, namely that people who are leading well have a worldview. They have a point of view. We have, when I worked at Morgan, for example, we have this kind of, this sickness that we kind of believe only in technique, and we don't have this, there is no, if you go to work in a big bank, we're going to worry about, okay, does he know how to price derivatives? We're not going to ask, what do you ultimately care about, and why are we here on earth, and what's your point of view in the world, and this kind of thing. And the contemplation to attain love says, no, it's important, like the principle and foundation says, no, it's important to have a worldview. And the worldview that comes out of there, as I see it, is a very ennobling, positive kind of one, that God's hand, God's love is kind of shot through everything, including myself. I'm God's temple. And therefore, there's a point of view that follows from that. One, to be kind of happy about who I am and to feel I'm a good and noble and worthy person. And also the same thing for everybody else, including these kids who are a pain in the ass, the teacher I don't really like, the administrator who pisses me off, all of those things, And it's not to say that you end up with this Pollyannish attitude that takes away all of the natural frustrations that we all have, but it gives, I think, a way of being able to leap beyond that, not have those frustrations be the defining way that I interact with other people and do my job. Rather, at the end of each day, I'm able to if I do something like an examine or some reflective practice, at least I'm able to remind myself, wait a minute, that's not what I really think, and that's not me at my best, and I'm going to come back tomorrow and try to do it again the way I feel like it should be done. So I think that's the first thing about it is that it's a worldview, and second, it's a worldview that's very ennobling and positive and encouraging and optimistic. And then the last thing I think is that it's really a kind of a spur to gratitude, this kind of feeling that what do I have? What do you have really that you weren't given? Frankly, I didn't choose to be born in this country. I didn't create the genes I have. I didn't educate myself. And I think really any mature human being, certainly anybody steeped in this tradition, really is spurred to a lot of gratitude, that I've been given all these things. And, in my own life experience, truly grateful people are never kind of selfish, in the end, to me, if you're really grateful in some deep way, you're just spurred to say, okay, it wasn't mine to begin with, I've been given this, I want to give it back, and so there's this this kind of dynamic, it seems to me, in the rhythm or the flow of the whole exercises, and especially that last exercise that kind of one helps keep my head oriented the right way and keeps me thinking about other people in the right way, and also kind of helps to keep spurring me toward wanting to give, wanting to be generous, which of course is the way that prayer at the end of the whole thing flows. It's kind of a prayer of teach me to be more generous.